Hi, welcome back. My name's Chris from OuiCommunicate. I teach French to adults internationally and globally, and today we'll be speaking about picking up French in France. And before we start, don't forget I have a 100-hour intensive program to learn French. There's a link in the description. So that's an intensive online course for adults with close monitoring from myself. Let's start. The question of whether adults can, quote-unquote, just pick up French once they move to France is one that we hear regularly. I think many people imagine that living abroad will create a sort of sink or swim situation where the language just sticks. You know, you'll have to use it, you'll have to learn French, so you're going to learn French. But I'd like to question whether this really works in this video, and I'll start with a story. And this story is my own mum's 40-year experiment in a French-speaking country in Belgium. So my mum's an English lady, English woman, who moved to Brussels, where they speak French, in the late 1960s from England. And before going, her employer even paid for a French course. So she did take French lessons. That would have been in the 60s. Soon after arriving, several years later, she met my dad, who's a native speaker of French, and from then on, from the 60s onwards, she was literally surrounded by French. I think it's a very interesting laboratory type situation. Practically, my dad always spoke French to her and she answered back in English, which is why I'm bilingual today. I always heard two parents, one speak French, the other answer in English, so it was always a crisscross of languages in our family. So my dad always spoke to her in French. My brother and I always spoke French with him, and we spoke English with my mum. And of course, school, homework and all that, school, neighbours, family and friends, everything was in French, except the English-speaking friends, of course. So if anyone was in a perfect position, perfect laboratory conditions to, quote-unquote, pick up French, it was mine own mum. And yet, 40 years later, I can guarantee to you that no one would have confused her with a native French speaker. So she can handle everyday situations, she does that rather well, but her English accent remains. People hear her speak immediately, they know she's English. So as I said, she can handle everyday situations, she can talk to the neighbour, if the postman comes to the door, she can handle that. So she is conversational in French, but subtle meanings, expressions or implied jokes are often completely lost in translation. And as kids it's quite funny because we would literally cringe at her mistakes, being the teenagers we were. For example, expressions gone wrong. I remember when my French-speaking grandfather referred to my cousin's boyfriend, he referred to the boyfriend as her Jan. It's something you say, at least in Belgium. The Jan is the bloke, but my mum confused this with the name of a person, so she responded, well, Jan is welcome to come, isn't he? But, oh, Mum, it means her bloke. It doesn't mean Jan. It's not a name. You know, she completely missed the reference. I remember one morning we were driving to school. It was early in the morning. It was still dark outside. She once scolded a cyclist from cycling without the headlights on. And she said, les lumières. I can still hear her say it. So, les lumières. The actual word was les phares. The headlight, les phares. My brother and I literally hiding in shame. Mom, it's not les lumières. And also one time she told off a neighbour. My younger brother was very good at getting into arguments with local kids. That local kid said something to my mum didn't take it well, and she called that lady a salope, which means a tramp, a slut, a tart, a bitch, une salope, which is not exactly the type of word you'd place in a residential area between well-to-do people. But to her credit, there were advantages, and I remember when I got my first detention in school, I was 14 years old, I got my first and only detention, which is, in French, it's called une retenue. I was so nervous, I was in the car, how am I going to tell my parents I got detention? When I said, School gave me a retenue. She didn't interpret it as a punishment at all, because of course she'd been to school in England. It was a completely different country and a different era, of course. I thought it would, the word retenue, I thought it would trigger, I don't know, family shame. What do you mean you got a retenue? But the word retenue meant nothing at all to her, of course. I'd completely underestimated it. So that's nice. You got one of those, did you? So that was one of the advantages. So this story shows that even in full immersion, 24/7, 365 days a year, in full immersion, you don't magically absorb everything about French, and some things just never sink in. Okay, so let's put my mum's 40-year experience in full immersion aside, in a French-speaking environment, and talk about the realities of arriving in France as an adult with zero or almost no French. You unpack, you get coffee, you head outside. Excitedly, you spot a local and you say, "Excuse me, can you chat with me, correct my mistakes, and maybe explain grammar to me? In English, please." It's not going to happen, quite obviously. Mathematically or statistically, learning French by chance in France practically means that you must stumble across each grammar pattern and each vocabulary word more than once, encounter it, not understand it, draw your conclusions, process it, encounter it again, and learn that way. Of course, you have to recognize it, remember it, and self-correct, and you have to repeat it hundreds of times. Mathematically, it's starting to look, the odds are starting to look very small that this would ever happen. And if your intention as an adult is to go to France with minimal French and rely on the sink or swim approach, we can even run a quick self-check in 10 easy questions. Number 1, which social context will I actually use French in? Number 2, who will I be speaking with? Number 3, how many hours of French conversation will I realistically get every week? Number 4, how many different people will I be speaking with? Number 5, how will I avoid fossilizing mistakes? Who's going to correct existing mistakes so they don't fossilize over a number of years? Number 6, will I have in-depth conversations or just surface level exchanges? Number 7, do I ever have in-depth conversations in my own language now in my own country? Why would it happen in France? Number 8, what's my realistic timeline for fluency? When exactly will it happen? Are we talking about months, years, decades? Number 9, will locals correct me in France or just let the mistake slide, as is usually the case? And number 10, am I confident that the people I'm learning with use good French in France? How do you know? And you know, my intention here is not to be dismissive of anyone's projects or positive thinking. I'll go to France, I'll pick up France. You know, it's great to think in these terms. It's a very positive frame of mind, and I've even heard some high-level influencers say that you can actually sink or swim and it will work out for you, but languages are complex things. And in my experience, I mean, I was on the front row as a spectator. I was literally born in a bilingual experiment, in a bilingual laboratory. I saw how my mum handled it since I was old enough to speak. And it only works to an extent. It doesn't guarantee speaking well. And it really doesn't guarantee, well, much at all. What usually happens is that you fall into a type of survival language skills, which is rather very poor grammatically and regarding the pronunciation, and people nod and they understand what you're on about, but by no means are you speaking the language well. But all is not lost, interestingly, because there are advantages to living in France when it comes to vocabulary, which is an interesting thing I've noticed several times before. When you're in immersion in a country, you do pick up words that learners abroad don't pick up, that have to do with the practical vocabulary of your practical situation. You know, very practical nouns. For example, words for la mairie or official paperwork or gas and electricity bills, and you quickly learn the names of these things. So adults will learn the words they need for real life. Vehicle inspections, paperwork, fitting rooms, coat hangers, 3 items maximum, VAT, things like that. The names of food, of course. When you go to the supermarket, you see the name of food every day in front of you. So this will give you a type of learning experience, yeah. And I also think that because French is more real and it takes on this third dimension because you're actually living within French and it's rather more tied to real life events, words may stick easier than learning them in a more artificial way maybe before you move to France. So this just about concludes this video on the realities of picking up French in France. It didn't entirely work for my mum, despite French being in her own home, as well as surrounding her in social situations. Your specialized French will benefit, specialized words of vocabulary will benefit. I think that the odds are extremely low that you will get much conversation practice in France, and even lower of ever getting corrections from native speakers. I think that even if you do get corrections from native speakers, in an ideal world, they might not be well explained to you. Typically French speakers, they'll say things like, this is how we say it in everyday life, but they often insist on details instead of the foundational parts of French. So they often insist on marginal parts of the language. That's what I think of the sink or swim approach. It's what I saw. It's what I saw for over 40, 50 years now. I hope this video was useful. I'm throwing it out there. You know, I'm not trying to dampen anyone's enthusiasm of going to France, but I think that languages are a science, they are complex systems, and we do have a tendency to underestimate their complexity. My name's Chris from OuiCommunicate. I teach French to adults. I hope this video was useful. See you soon in a class.